Today we're going to be building a React calculator app in React, TypeScript, and using Material UI. So this is the end product and this is what it looks like, just to show you the kind of functionalities that you have. So, if you do 12 plus 3, that will give you 15. You can clear this out. You can do optional chaining. So 1 plus 2 plus 2 equals 5. That will work with any of the operations. So we can do 5 divided by 2 minus 1 equals 1.5. We've got a percentage. So if you do percentage on it, this will give you 0.5. Our clear button also works. So let's say we did 50 plus 10, and then we clicked clear, and we did 20 instead. That would give us 70, so it still remembered our 50. That app is also completely responsive. So if we just inspect it and go to mobile view, as you can see, we change the size of it up to a certain point. It keeps its form factor, and then we can make it smaller, and the buttons will resize and reshape. And if you just view this on an iPhone SE, for example, you can see that this fits perfectly within the mobile view as well. Basically, a very simple calculator app to get you started with React and TypeScript. And we're also going to be using Material UI, which is a component library. This will save us from having to write massively, if any, amount of CSS. And the way we use this is just by using a npm package. So you can use npm, or if you want to use yarn, you can use this command here as well. I'll put a link to this in the description. This tutorial is for beginners who are starting out with React, so it will be touching on some basic concepts of React and not using any advanced techniques to do so. Let's get into the video. We'll start off by creating our React app by doing npx create React app, then the name of our app, and then we'll select a template for TypeScript. This should take a couple minutes to run. Once it's done running, we can cd into our folder, and then we want to add Material UI, which should also take a couple of minutes to run. And whilst that's running, we can go ahead and start deleting the files that we don't need. And also removing some of the code that's not needed in here as well. Now that we've done that and Material UI has finished installing, we can run our app by doing yarn start. This should start on the port 3000, and I'm just going to use an extension called Simple Browser to run the app so I can have it side by side. This way I don't need to leave Visual Studio Code to develop my app. So what we want to do now is create a file called theme.tsx, and in here we're going to define our theme for the app. So we'll define an object called theme, which will use the create theme from Material UI. And within here, we can have properties such as palette, which will define the palette of the entire app. And we're going to set the mode to dark because we want a dark mode app. We can also set the primary color, which for me is going to be a yellow to match the Redouan.io logo. But feel free to set the color of your choice. And then what we'll do is export this theme as the default object from this file. Next, we want to import this theme into the index.tsx file, which we can then use a theme provider, which is provided by Material UI, to pass in our theme for this app. We also need to define a CSS baseline, which uses the default CSS values from Material UI across our app. And as you can see, it's set our background to a dark color, and it will also set our text to light colors. Next thing we want to do is create a calculator base, and this will be the actual base of our calculator. So what we're going to use is a library called styled, which can take in a HTML element, In this case, we're going to be using paper, which is from Material UI, and then we define theme as a property, and then we can pass in CSS properties within this styled object to create a styled component that we can then use within our app. Here we're defining padding of theme spacing 2, which will use the defaults of the app, and a margin top and a border radius to give some styling to our base of the calculator. So we also want to wrap our app in a container, and a container is a component within Material UI which allows you to kind of put your items within a window and set a media query so that it doesn't go beyond that. So we're going to say a max width of small, and then we can now put in our calculator base within the app. We can also add elevation to this, which will give our calculator base some drop shadow. And let's just give it some content of hello world and save that, and that will render a little box with all of our styles and our content within it. Then we want to define our output container, which will be the container that will hold the value of our calculator, so the number that we're typing in. This will just be a div, so again we'll do a styled div and we'll take in the theme. And on this one, we'll set a couple more properties. So we'll say the width is 100%. Text align it to the right. Give it a height of 2 EM so you can scale. Add some padding to it again. And change the font size so it stands out a bit from the rest of the calculator. And then let's just add some overflow as well, so that if we have too many numbers, it can hide it on either side of the boundary. We can then start setting up the structure of our app, and we're going to be using grids for this. Grids are from Material UI, and it's a nice way to structure elements in your application. You usually have a grid container, which is the outer element of the grid, and then within that grid container you can have grid items. So we can set spacing on our grid container to say the spacing between our grid items, and then let's go ahead and create our first grid item. We'll say the excess is 12, which means that it will take up the entire width of the container at any viewpoint. And then within here we'll put in our output container, and let's just give this a value of 0 for now. Now let's go and create our digit buttons. We're going to call this grid digit button, as we're going to be wrapping it in a grid component. So let's do an export const grid digit button, and this will be a React FC component, which is a React function component, and it will take in a grid digit button props, which we'll define in a second. And then we can deconstruct the props here as well. So we're going to be taking in a digit, an enter digit function, and XS, which we're going to default to 3. And then let's define an interface for our props, and here we can say the digit is a string, the enter digit, which is a function that's going to take in a digit as a string but return void, and XS, which will be an optional property, which is a number. So let's continue defining our function. We can start writing out what we're going to return. It's going to look a little something like this. We'll be having a grid component, which we need to import from MUI, and then we can set the XS to the XS property. This also is going to be an item, a grid item. And then within here, we want to use a button from material, and set it to full width, and set the variant to outlined. And then we can say the onClick function will be enter a digit. So this is what will happen when we click the button, and it will take in the digit that we pass in also, and then we can display the digit as the number on the button as well. I'm just going to switch to Zen mode to make the view a bit more concise. Now let's copy and paste this button, and then rename the copied version to grid operation button, and this will be our operation buttons like multiply, divide, and so on. So in here, let's go ahead and rename it to grid operation button. Let's rename the props to grid operation button props, and let's make some changes in here. So we're no longer showing digit, we want to show operation. We can change the props to also being called operation. The function we're taking in is going to be called select operation, and it will take in an operation as a string. And we no longer need this XS. Instead, we want to have selected operation as a string. Let's rename our props and then change the function that we're calling so that it all matches up. We no longer need this XS thing. However, what we do need is another styled component. Here we're going to be defining a styled button. So we're importing button from Material UI, but we're creating a new component called the styled button. And this is going to take in another property called selected as a Boolean, which will allow us to use this Boolean property within our styled component. So let's set the background on the button to a light yellow. This is just a color that I will use by preference. Feel free to set it to this or change it to your own color that you prefer. And then what we're going to do with the border color is have a ternary operation on the props.selected property, and if it's true we want it to be white, and if it's false then we want it to be this bold yellow color, which is defaulted to. So that means when it's selected it will be white and given the effect that it's highlighted. Let's now swap out button to use our new styled button component, and it's complaining because we need to pass in the Boolean for the selected property, and this will now just be selected operation equals operation, which will be true or false based on whether this operation is selected or not. We'll then go back to our app.tsx where we'll start creating our state variables. So the first one we want to create is the current value. So we'll call this current value and then have the setter named as set current value, and we could just do equals use state with a default value of 0 because that's what we want it to default to when we first start. Just import that from React, and then what we can do is replace that 0 with the value that we created now, just like that. And then what we'll do is move on to creating our set digit function. So we'll just name this set digit and define a lambda function, and in here we want to take in digit as a parameter, which is a string, and then we can set the current value to digit. And then let's create our second parameter, which will be operation, and we can call the setter set operation. Now let's create our select operation function, which will take in a string, which is the operation. Let's just call it x, and then let's just say set operation x, or let's just call it operation actually. Next, we can start adding in our operation buttons. So to do this, we're going to add a new grid item, which will also be a container. And then let's just set the column spacing on this to 1, so it gives a bit of padding between our items within this grid container. And then let's bring in our grid operation button and pass in the parameters that we defined. So for operation, let's do AC as the first operation button, and the select operation function, which we just defined, we'll pass that in for that parameter. And then the selected operation will be our operation variable that we've defined in the state. And if we save this, you can see that the button now shows up in the calculator. However, this doesn't look exactly how we want it to look, so let's head over to our theme file and modify how our buttons are going to look throughout our entire application. So if we say components and then MIUI button, this is the underlying component that MIUI uses. For the button, we can add a style overrides, and we want to override the root style to have a border radius of 25. And then let's also change the typography of the entire app for buttons specifically, and set the font size to 1 rem. And if we save that, we can see it's changed how the button looks, and this will apply to all the buttons in our application. And now that we've got it looking how we want, we can start creating our other operation buttons. So let's copy this and then create one for C, one for the percentage operation, and one for division. And okay, something looks wrong, so it's not rendering correctly. Let's just take a look. Okay, so we've missed out the XS as 3. So if we save that now, it should be responsive, and because the grid is made up of 12 spaces, if you split it by 3, then it will always take up the entire width of the component. Anyway, let's create another grid container, which will act as the second row of our calculator. And in here, we can add in the grid digit button and pass in a digit. So the first one is going to be number 7. And we can pass in the enter digit function as well, which is set digit. And let's just copy that a few times, and also add in a grid operation button at the end. So we can save that. You can see that comes up on the right hand side, but let's just change it to 8 and 9 and the operation as multiply. And then let's copy this entire bit and paste it a few times for the other rows. So for 4, 5, and 6 with a minus button, and then 1, 2, and 3 with the addition button. And let's save that. And now that's, you can see update on the right. And then let's just add in one more for the last row, which will contain a 0, a 1, and the equals sign. So for the equals sign, what we want to do is create a grid item with XS is 3, and then create a button in here which will be full width, and give it a variant of contained, so it's going to be look a little bit different from the rest of the buttons. And then let's just give an equal sign inside there, and then let's set the XS on the 0 to 6 so that I can take up a bit more space. Oh, and it's supposed to be a dot, so there we go. And now we've got that set up. We were just missing column spacing on the rest of these grid containers, so let's just add that in so we can get that bit of spacing in between those columns. And if we save that, now that's looking a lot better. You can click on the buttons, the set digit function is working correctly, you can select different digits. So let's continue building our logic. So we need 2 more variables. One we're going to call prev value for previous value, and let's call this a set prev value. Then we also want an overwrite. We can set the set to set overwrite and the value to overwrite. And then we want to change set current value from just setting digit to actually setting a string with current value in front of the digit. So now if we click on the buttons, you can see we can create a chain of numbers, but this is also adding in the decimal points as well. So what we need to do is say if overwrite and digit doesn't equal decimal point, then we set the current value to digit. Otherwise, we want to set the current value to current value with digit. And then at the end of this, we just want to do set overwrite to false, and let's just do change overwrite to default to true at the start, so it will overwrite the first number. And then now you can see we can add more different numbers and it will change from the 0, but we've still got the issue of the decimal point. So to fix this, let's add another if statement to say if current value 0 equals 0 as a string and digit equals 0, then return. Also, if current value dot includes a decimal point and digit equals a decimal point, then we also want to return. Let's just refresh, and then now if we try to add in multiple decimal points, it won't let us, and it did the override as well. Now let's go ahead and create our clear function. So this will just take in no parameters, and then we'll do set previous value to an empty string and set operation to an empty string, and also set the current value to 0. And then we can also set overwrite to true. Then let's go ahead and declare our delete function. This will just set the current value to 0 as a string and also set overwrite to true. Then let's come down to our operation buttons and then set the AC to clear and C to delete. Now let's just test that out, and we can see AC can delete and C can also clear out the numbers as you'd expect it to. Now let's go ahead and create our percent function. In here, let's declare a variable called cur for current, and then we'll pass the float of current value to that variable so that we can get it as a number. And let's just set current value to cur divided by 100 and do a .to string on that, and this should give us the functionality we want. Okay, something's not right. We just need to set percent as the function for the button as well. Go ahead and save that. Now you can see when we click percent, it works as we'd expect it to. Next up, let's continue building out our select operation function. So we want to set the previous value to the current value to have a store of that, and also set overwrite to true. So what this basically means is that when we select an operation, when we click the next button, it will overwrite so that we can have a new number form. Cool, so now let's go ahead and create our calculate function. So let's declare this. First thing we want to do is do an if statement. If there is no previous value or there is no operation, then we just want to return the current value. And then let's parse our current value and previous values into new variables. So we'll call the first one cur and the second one prev. We'll declare a variable called result and create a switch statement on the operation. So for case divide, all we want to do is do result equals prev divided by cur. And then let's just copy this down a few more times so that we can do the other operations as well. So for multiply, we just want to multiply, and let's add minus and addition also, and let's just change up the operations for those. Once we've got that, we can return result back. And then let's create a function for our equal button, as we won't be using calculate as the equals. So equals will call the calculate function and store it in a new variable called val, and then we can set the current value to a string interpolated version of the value we get from calculate. And then set the previous value to an empty string, and also set the operation to an empty string, which will just basically clear it out. And then we want to set override to true. Now we can add an on click button to our equal sign and just then just add the equals function as the on click button. So now let's go ahead and test out our app. Let's clear it. 5 plus 4, does that work? That gives us 9, that's correct. Let's add a 6 onto that 9, that's 15. And then let's clear it and then do 5 plus 9 and click equals, that's 14. Let's do 5 divided by 1, that should give us 5, that works. 10 divided by 2, that equals 5. Now let's do 5 plus 2 plus 6. So this is chaining, and we can see that this isn't actually working. So we still need to add the chaining logic in. What we want to do is go to select operation and do if prev value. Then we want to get the calculate value again and set the current value to interpolated version of value. And then set previous value to the interpolated version of the value as well. Else we can move previous value up in there. So now if we test that out, 5 plus 2 plus 2, we can see it's updating. It went to 9 plus 3 equals 12. And there you have it. That's our completed calculator app. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like this, then make sure to subscribe. This is actually part 1 of 2 videos. I will be releasing a video soon to go over how to write tests for this app using Jest. If this video is already uploaded, then it will be linked in the description down below, or I'll put something up on the screen now for you to be able to click. If you have any questions about anything that we did, then please leave a comment down in the comment section below. I'll respond to you. I'll try and help you out. If you're enjoying this type of content, for those who are already subscribed to me and you want to see more stuff like this, then yeah, please do let me know. I do have a couple more projects planned as well, so stay tuned for those. Peace out.